what you do.
My name is Jeff Porter. I'm Executive Vice President for Scala Incorporated. We're the world's leading platform for digital signage.
Nice. You want to do that one more time?
Yes, I do, because I kind of like swallowed the last word.
Do you need water? You got water, okay.
I got water. Hi, my name is Jeff Porter. I'm the Executive Vice President for Scala Incorporated. We're the world's leading platform for digital signage.
How did you become interested in computers, Jeff? Obviously you are, working at that company.
Well, it was, let's see. First time I bought a computer was, it was a Commodore PET, believe it or not. My parents thought I was absolutely nuts. I sent $1,000 in the mail to Pennsylvania and got this humongous box back that had a PET in it, had a cassette drive and a little monochrome 9-inch screen and a keyboard, and I started typing in basic computer programs way back when. That was probably sometime in the late 70s, I guess.
Great. So, all right. So that obviously,
So I was an electrical engineering major in college and kind of got into computers early on. So it was a nice little hobby to have at the time. I was a co-op student with Eastman Kodak and later took a job with Bell Labs during the whole divestiture period, so that was a fun time to be at Mother Bell. And a headhunter happened to get a hold of me and said that Commodore was looking for engineers. And I said, sign me up. So I moved to Westchester, Pennsylvania, and got my first computer job, per se, with Commodore.
Can you talk about, what was it like when you got to Commodore? What was the environment there like?
The initial environment when I started at Commodore was, it was the C64 boom years. Huge factory over there, which is in a building now occupied by QVC. Just absolutely buzzing over the Commodore 64. And I had my choice of working on either Unix workstations or laptop computers. So I picked laptops. So one of my first projects was designing a, believe it or not, battery-powered laptop with LCD screen. The LCDs were actually manufactured in Westchester. The semiconductors manufactured in Norristown. So, we were the little baby Silicon Valley of Pennsylvania here.
Oh, that's a great line. So wait, let me get this straight. You were designing laptops at Commodore?
I was designing laptops, believe it or not. The kind of model I was going after to kill was the Radio Shack TRS Model 100. Had a little 8-line LCD screen with 40 columns, and I managed to make an 80-column screen. Woo! Ran off of 4 AA batteries and 6502 based. It was real fun. In fact, Andy Finkel, who you're going to be talking to here, was working on the same project, doing some of the software for that. So I was the hardware guy. I was the hardware guy. Andy was the software guy, and that was a fun project.
What was it like designing computers in those days? Could you kind of compare and contrast that to the way it might be done now?
Oh my God, it was. This was pretty rustic. We had a whopping 8-bit microprocessor with, very small amounts of memory. All the software was, assembler for the most part. Compilers were, sort of a thing of the future. But it was a fun time because you could do amazing things with little 8-bit microprocessors.
Okay, from a technical standpoint, yeah, I understand what you mean. How about from a social standpoint? I heard that there was a big social atmosphere among the engineers at Commodore. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. The social life, it was a big family. In fact, it was kind of like a billion-dollar garage shop at that time. It was an incredibly fun place to work. It was just, you were eating, sleeping, breathing, and everything Commodore stuff, and it was awesome. There was no, shall we say, large hierarchy at Commodore to tell you what to do. So in engineering, you got to be sort of the product manager in the marketing department and figure out what to build it, and give it to the salespeople to go sell. So it was an amazing freedom to innovate at that time at Commodore.
All right, so just for context, what years are you talking specifically?
Okay, this was I started at Commodore in spring of '84. So, this is, prior to, Apple IICs were hot then. IBM PCs were still pretty clunky and big and monochrome green screens. Lotus 123 was the spreadsheet. Excel and Word weren't even invented yet. So, it's a pretty early days of the, microprocessor industry.
Okay, so could you say, like, my next question would be, like, what was the marketplace for computers, for personal computers, like at the time that the Amiga was launched?
Well, the Amiga was launched in fact, I just looked at my little trophy on my bookcase before I came over here, July 23rd, 1985 at the Lincoln Center in New York City. There weren't many things that were color, multimedia, multitasking. The Amiga was it. If you wanted to do spreadsheets, you had a PC. If you wanted to play, cheesy games, you had, Commodore 64s and maybe Apple IIs. So if you wanted to do anything that was, multimedia oriented, and people didn't even use the word multimedia back then, you were doing it on an Amiga. In fact, eventually there were two killer apps on the Amiga. One was the Video Toaster, which was kind of like an Avid workstation on the Amiga, and the other was Scala, which is the company I work at now.
What was Scala at the time?
Well, Scala was founded in '87 by a pretty innovative, forward-thinking Norwegian kid who said, hey, I want to manage content on a network of screens. And at that time, it was TV sets, dial-up modems, and Amigas. And the whole goal is to have a system that allows you to easily create content and then send that to a remote screen with, believe it or not, dial-up modems at the time, which were probably a whopping 1200 baud. So you had to have very efficient communications and awesome multimedia graphics. There was only one platform to use. That was the Amiga.
How you doing, Jeff?
I'm great.
All right, good.
How am I doing?
Doing great. We're just warming up.
Awesome.
Let's just throwaway questions.
It's the stories. I got lots of stories. So if you don't mention the stories that I need to mention, I'll be queuing you on that one.
Awesome. Yeah, actually, I'm kind of curious. What can you tell us about? What do you know about? Hang on, let me do one adjustment here. What do you know about the early history of the Amiga in terms of its development?
Well, the early Amiga was originally developed as a game machine. There's a guy by the name of Jay Miner who was sort of the, integrated circuit designer of the Atari stuff back then, the old game machines. The Commodore 64 kind of put a stake in the heart of the game machines. Why would you buy just a game machine when you could buy a full computer and run awesome games on it? So at that time, the Commodore 64 was, the ultimate game machine, as well as a baby computer. So it kind of fit both purposes. That doesn't really exist today. People just buy game machines to be entertained. But at the time, it was sort of a interesting hobby that people had.
So, all right, what can you tell us? So, obviously, the Amiga was not designed at Commodore, right? It was designed somewhere else.
Well, it's kind of interesting because the game machine industry pretty much was a dead duck at the time. The folks that were designing this ultimate chipset for a game machine needed to do something else. So they were looking for additional funding to go, take this awesome computer graphics chipset and turn it into a computer. And they looked to Atari and Commodore, and those were sort of like the home computer giants of the time. Jack Tramiel, who originally started Commodore, had fled, and he went to work for Atari, and so there was this sort of Atari-Commodore war back then. And in the end, Commodore acquired the Amiga technology, which was a chipset that nearly worked. It was in its early stages. It didn't have an operating system, but it did some awesome computer graphics. So Commodore invested approximately $55 million to bring that to market, turned it into a computer, added a multitasking operating system that was, designed in-house, packaged it into what eventually became the Amiga 1000, which was launched in July of 1985.
So, all right, let's rewind a bit. It's 1984. You're at Commodore. The Commodore 64 has been going gangbusters, like you said, right?
Yeah.
Well, what's starting to happen?
Well, we tried to figure out what do you do for an encore after the Commodore 64? So we did something called the Commodore 128, which was sort of a, evolutionary step from the Commodore 64, but it wasn't really the revolutionary step that needed to happen for the next generation stuff. So by acquiring the Amiga technology, we had an amazing platform to build the next generation Commodore 64 on. That was, of course, the challenge, because after $55 million later, we sold about 75,000 units, and in the first year, and that was pretty disappointing, to be quite honest. So the Amiga 1000, although it had an amazing technology there, was sort of, caught in the middle between it was too expensive for, a home computer game machine, and it wasn't expandable enough for a business computer. So basically, we decided we needed to split that into two, one an Amiga 500 and one an Amiga 2000. So the Amiga 500 was sort of a Commodore 64-esque like device, so that was my baby. And then the 2000 was more of a IBM-looking box with plug-in cards and hard drives and things like that.
Okay, yeah, we will rewind back to the 500 and the different models. Actually, could you kind of tell us
how I got involved with that? Yeah, I got to bridge the gap. I got to bridge the gap.
Well,
So
I want to go back.
I was doing laptop computers, right? So how the hell did I get involved with the Amiga? Right. So here we go. I'm doing this wonderful laptop computer. It's called the Commodore LCD. It's based on 6502 technology. It's a new thing to use CMOS to be able to have something that's low power that can run on batteries, which is great. But, we poured a lot of money into, developing the Amiga, and we didn't really have the sales that we needed. So, we were doing Unix workstations, laptop computers, and the Amigas. And unfortunately, we couldn't continue all three of those. So the management at the time said, okay, we spent a boatload of money on the Amiga. We're putting all our eggs in that basket. So they said, LCD team, Unix workstations. Of course, there's no market for Unix workstations or laptops, is there? So, we all jumped on the Amiga bandwagon. So I actually got tasked initially to take the Amiga 1000 and make it work around the world, because it was a very NTSC-friendly, American-friendly, English-only kind of computer. And we had an enormous amount of business at Commodore outside of the U.S. In fact, eventually, 90% of Commodore's business was outside of the United States. 9-0. That's pretty impressive. So I basically went on a round-the-world tour to make sure that I could take the technology from the A1000 and make sure that works in PAL instead of NTSC, 220 volts instead of 110 volts, translate it into all the different languages, keyboards, and all this other kind of stuff. And we launched that in Frankfurt, forget when that was, probably in 86, maybe late 85. So I got really quite the in-depth tour of the Amiga technology back then. And that's sort of when I realized that, there's this wonderful computer, but it's kind of expensive and it's not very expandable. So we basically had the concept of taking the A1000 and splitting it into the 500 and the 2000. And my job was to make the Commodore 64-esque Amiga 500. And I knew everything about Commodore at the time. I was pretty good at cost-reducing hardware. And I did a pretty amazing job to basically cut the cost of that down to something that was incredibly affordable.
Like percentage-wise, what would that be?
It was less than half the cost. So I think the original Amiga 1000s cost Commodore in excess of $500 a pop. They retailed for $1,200. I got the Amiga 500 down to $200 or less.
That's awesome. Okay, just rewinding a little bit. Can you tell us about, you've covered a little bit, but could you tell us about the launch of the Amiga itself, the 1000? In not only the event, but just the whole, bring it to the marketplace. What was that like?
Well, the launch at the Lincoln Center was really pretty amazing. I wasn't really involved in the core of the Amiga at that time. I was, because of my Bell Labs background, I was the modem guy at Commodore. So, when the Amiga first came out, somebody said, "Hey, we need a 1200 baud Hayes compatible modem for the Amiga. Anybody can do that?" I said, "Yeah, I can do that." So, I was at the Lincoln Center there I was dialing up CompuServe at the time, and here we go. I got this cool little modem thing. I had sort of this killer answering machine product that I was working on at the time that was computer controlled. So I was doing all this funky stuff on with telephony because that was my background at the time. And then I got to take the knowledge of the Amiga and basically internationalize that.
What was the reaction of the marketplace to the release of the Amiga 1000?
Oh my God, everyone loved it. It was an amazing cult-like event. It was, the following that you have for, Apple these days is the kind of religious zealots that we had following the Amiga. They were absolutely convinced that this was the next platform, and everyone was super psyched about the capabilities of having a computer that did multimedia, multitasking, and all this other kind of stuff. It was, if you were a creative guy, if you were a computer geek, this was it. This was Nirvana.
Okay, let's talk about the 500 a little bit more now. Be kind of cool to, would you mind holding it?
Yeah, no problem.
Let's see what I can get here. Pull this off.
Peel off the sticker.
And the coffee stains. Yeah, actually, this one didn't come with a power supply. Yay!
Oh boy.
So it really is just a prop.
Might be able to help you there.
Oh, actually, I would like that. Just been.
I might have it.
Sadly, the only Amiga stuff I've done the past few years has been emulation. But
Well, that's pretty amazing.
4,000.
That is
Still
amazing.
looking for a 4,000.
Okay, I'm
Yeah,
not
I know.
sure.
We
I
had
have
some
a
talk about
4000.
emulation yesterday and the challenges that would be involved to
Yeah.
make that happen. There you go.
Okay.
Cool. All right. So.
Let's see. Maybe I should do it like this so I can see the Amiga up on the top.
What is that thing that you're holding, Jeff?
This is my baby. This is the Amiga 500. It's quite the killer home computer. At the time when Jack Tramiel left Commodore to go to Atari, he took a few of the Commodore guys with him, and they developed something called the ST. And we had the Amiga 1000 at the time, and that was great. It just kicked butt on the ST, but the ST was pretty inexpensive. So guess where the 500 came in? This sucker is the ST killer. So.
Yeah, and you want to talk about some of the parts there?
Yeah, well, this is, the industrial design was done by a guy in Japan that I found that it was absolutely amazing what he could do with, he'd draw by hand a picture of the computer, and you would swear you were looking at a photograph of the real thing. So we went through a couple industrial designs here, but it's pretty amazing. The technology that's in here is pretty, believe it or not, low tech. No surface mount technology. The PC board has got 2 layers in it. Passes FCC, by the way. It's got all these connectors along the back for video and I/O and stuff like this. So it's kind of like the C64 Amiga. And the intent was to put it in all the shops that carried the C64 because, leverage our distribution channels that we had. You could buy a C64 in Toys R Us or Kmart or Sears or, places like this that were basically blowing them out. So, that's really what I saw in terms of being able to make a very cost-effective. I think it retailed for, $4.99 or something like that. We made a pretty decent profit on because I'm just told you that the cost of goods of this was $200. So it's, I don't think hardware guys make that kind of margin anymore. Kind of glad I'm not in the hardware business. But it was a great time. It was an amazing technology, and it did all sorts of multimedia. It did awesome games. Had reasonable expansion as well. So you really had a full-blooded home computer that did killer computer games.
As you're holding that there, could you kind of tell us what was that machine that you're holding? What was the demographic? What was the, who were you targeting with that machine? Who would you hope would buy it?
Well, it was pretty easy for me to target the demographic because I built the machine that I wanted. And so there were lots of people like me that were computer junkies that, wanted this awesome home computer at an affordable price. So, it's just, the home computer hobbyist that perhaps couldn't afford an Apple at over $1,000. And, the PC was not doing games back then. It was just doing, spreadsheets and, word processing. So it wasn't very fun. So this was the fun thing. If you wanted to have fun, you got an Amiga.
What did you use yours for?
Oh, well, it's a little bit of everything. I used it for games. I used it for, online services, word processing. Didn't do any spreadsheets back then. Email. We were pretty early on in the internet connectivity, believe it or not, at Commodore back then. So the internet wasn't what it was. We had a whole bunch of dial-up modems talking to all sorts of computers around the world, and we just, networked them all together, and poof, that's where you had email. So it was fun. It was awesome. It was a great time to be at Commodore. It was amazingly fun time. We did an amazing job at bringing this product to market. And because I had seen all the, the A1000 from the inside out, I was able to figure out how to really cost reduce the heck out of this sucker.
Yeah, so I'll blow that in your hand so it doesn't get to be too much. Plus I can hear a little clickety clack on the keys.
Yeah.
That was cool though. Glad I brought that in.
Another thing to insert there.
Okay, stand by. Let me get a little close up on you. Okay, what would you like to say?
So the Amiga 500 was an amazing hit. We sold over 4 million of these babies around the world. And, you can't ask for better than that. It was, so we'd gone from an Amiga 1000 that sold a whopping 75,000 units, all told, to an Amiga 500 that sold over 4 million.
What were your hopes for the Amiga at that time? What did you think was going to happen with it?
Well, I had dreams of it being the next Commodore 64, and that's pretty much what we did. I would say we had a pretty international presence with that. From day one, we had, an amazing amount of support for all the different languages, because that's what I did on the A1000. So I would say about 80% of the Amigas around the world were sold outside the United States. In the U.S., they brought in a team from, pardon me. Too much talking. So in the U.S., we let's back up. Sorry, let's have a good start to this. So about 80% of the Amiga 500s were sold outside the United States. In the United States, instead of putting the Amiga 500 into Toys R Us or Kmart or Sears, we put it into professional computer stores because we brought in folks from Apple that knew how to take a Macintosh at the time, which, by the way, was only black and white, and sell that for about $2,500. So they were thinking, hey, we know how to sell, high-end computers. I didn't design a high-end computer. This is a $500 game machine. Please put it in Toys R Us. I can still remember the Apple guy putting his arm around my shoulder saying, Jeff. Had this discussion with Steve. I'm having it with you. Don't worry. I'll take care of your baby. Rolling my eyes there. So fortunately, the rest of the world, when we first introduced this...
I'm sorry, who was the Apple guy? Could you please rewind on that a little bit?
Okay.
Please elaborate on that. That actually is part of another question.
Okay, so in the U.S., they brought in a team from Apple. There was a fellow by the name of Harry Copperman and a marketing man by the name of Frank Leonardi, who had basically said, Jeff, don't worry. We had this discussion with Steve. I know what to do with this computer. We're going to give it the highest reputation. We're going to put it in all the high-end computer stores. It'll be great. And I'm thinking, my God, do they not understand that this is a $500 game machine? It needs to be in Toys R Us. Fortunately, the rest of the world saw this Amiga 500 and said, we have the next generation Commodore 64. You are correct, sir. And we sold 4 million of those babies from that point on. Unfortunately, the U.S. didn't sell that much, which goes to show why 90% of Commodore's revenue was from outside the U.S.
90%?
9-0.
What?
So this is one of the things that really, people don't understand. They say, well, why did Commodore fail in the end? Couple reasons. They always thought that the marketing in the U.S. was screwed up, and that is true. Okay, the Amiga 500 was not a high-end business computer. Never should have been positioned or sold that way in the United States, and they pretty much failed at doing that. But even if sales in the U.S. were 0, Commodore still would have lived because the other 90% of the revenue was from the rest of the world that did figure out that this was the next generation Commodore 64.
You say the next generation Commodore 64. Maybe there's a way that you could phrase that makes it, kind of makes the viewer realize well, no, this wasn't the next generation Commodore 64. This was something really much more incredible than the 64. You know what I mean?
Well, exactly. So. It may have...
The computer of the future, something over the top.
Right. So clearly, this Amiga computer had an amazing technology built in. This had multitasking. No one was doing multitasking. It had video graphics. No one was doing multimedia video graphics like the Amiga. The Macintoshes were black and white. IBMs were green screens. No one had the kind of power and performance that the Amiga computer had in 1985. No one.
That is what I was looking for. Thank you. Okay. You kind of got my mind going about other people.
No. There's one more thing I need to add.
Hey, whatever you want.
One more thing I need to add about the whole kind of why did Commodore not succeed in the end?
Oh, sure.
So, as I said, 90% of Commodore's revenue was outside the U.S. So even though the marketing may have been misguided in the United States, why did Commodore fail? One man, Mehdi Ali. He was the investment banker that had arranged to get all the funding for Commodore to bring the Amiga to market, which, $55 million was nothing to sneeze at back in the middle 80s. So Mehdi was pretty much a tyrant. He was an investment banker, didn't know anything about sales, marketing, manufacturing, engineering, computers, but he knew about money. Unfortunately, he thought he knew everything about sales, marketing, computers, and manufacturing, and that's kind of the bad news of the situation. So he was introducing new computers the day after Thanksgiving that he didn't have in stock. So his warehouse was full of the previous generation computer. He was introducing a new computer at Christmas time that he couldn't ship, and he was air freighting stuff from the Far East to try and fill the demand, and basically you couldn't do it. So most companies that are in the consumer electronics marketplace, they do their trial balloons at CES, which is Consumer Electronics Show in January. They take orders in June at Summer CES in Chicago for whatever's going to be the hot thing that Christmas. And so you got to like put your money on the table in June, have the factories ramp up by September, have the stores filled by October, and cross your fingers that what you picked in June was going to be a hit for Christmas. So if you screw up Christmas in the consumer electronics industry, you are dead. Most people only get like one shot at that before they die. We actually had 2 shots at that before we died. Betty screwed up both shots.
Yeah, I wasn't even planning to get to the death of Commodore yet, but since we're on the subject, I mean, so you were employed by Commodore at the time?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I was.
What was that like?
Well, I was head of product development. I reported to the chief operating officer. So everything in terms of whatever we were building, operating systems and hardware and software and whatever the product is, that was my baby. So I had a pretty good legacy there in terms of the Amiga 500 being a hit, and we took that to the next level, and we did all sorts of interesting follow-on products from there as well.
Well, can you tell us about the day that you heard the Commodore was shutting down? Could you see the writing on the wall?
Yeah, I mean, if you screw up at Christmas, it was plainly obvious to everybody that you can't mess with Christmas and still survive as a company. So it was really unfortunate. My wife says it's kind of like I was in a divorce for a while because I was like into all these stages of denial. Was it something that I did? Blah 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 blah. Basically it's out of my control at that point. In spite of the fact that I made these amazing computers, and the team that we had was just absolutely committed to doing this amazing technology way back when. If you don't market it right, and if you waste all your money on air freight and miss timing and things like this, not much you can do.
Well, how did you feel when you heard the news that the company's going to be shutting its doors?
Well, it was sad. It was definitely sad. But when I sort of at the tail end of Commodore, we did. Let's see. Where do I want to? There's a whole bunch of things in the middle here that I probably need to rewind on.
Feel free to rewind, yeah.
Okay, so.
I'm going to be cutting it all out of order anyway.
Well, that's fine. Okay. So one of the interesting things that we did with the Amiga technology was we made this product called CDTV, which was sort of a stereo cabinet-looking thing that you'd hook up to your TV set. That, of course, could play amazing, Amiga games, but also could do other kinds of things. Brand new technology, 5-inch round shiny things, CD-ROMs. Wow, not just floppy drives anymore. So, there was a guy that prototyped this first generation CDTV, and I got called up to New York to visit with Irving Gould, who was the chairman of Commodore at the time, and Mehdi Ali, and folks like that. And they said, well, Jeff, we got this great concept, and you're the man that can cost reduce it and bring it to production. So I need you to go in the room next door. Yeah, tell me how much this is going to cost and when we can have it. And by the way, it's I think it was April or something like this, and they wanted to have this in production by Christmas. Okay, great, thanks.
So what was the CDTV? Was it kind of like a Sony PlayStation, or what was it?
It was, there was a product from Philips at the time called CDI. It's, basically looked like a nice piece of stereo gear that hooked up to your TV set, basically to play games. That was the whole thing. So we had this new concept of, CD-ROMs. That was pretty new. We actually managed to get movies on that, which was pretty amazing. This was the early days of MPEG technology for digital video, so we managed to, get that in CDTV eventually. So it was really kind of a fun time to say, hey, there's a different place in your home for a computer. It's, this entertainment system, if you will, that played awesome games and could connect to, online services and stuff like that. So it was really a very early on sort of, PlayStation, Wii, Nintendo kind of thing. So it's, I got put off into the room and said, okay, let's see, it's going to cost this much. And, basically, when you're a hardware guy and you're designing computers, it's pretty much takes 9 months to pilot production. And like making a baby, putting 2 men on the job doesn't make it go any faster. So I basically said, okay, it's going to cost this much, which is great. But, bad news is it's not going to be in the stores by October. I'm going to be lucky to be in pilot production by December. Oh, Jeff, you're not helping here. And I said, well, if you wanted to have this done by Christmas, I needed to know, about 3 or 4 months ago, so that I've got the 3 or 4 months I need prior to Christmas to actually make this available. So one of the other guys said, well, gosh, I could have a board laid out by, in a couple of weeks. As if I couldn't have a board laid out in a couple of weeks. So a guy that was in the sales department got the job. Great, you're the kind of person I want. That man was Don Gilbreth, pretty interesting guy. So he used a bunch of contractors to bring CDTV to market. So guess what? He was lucky to be in pilot production by Christmas, and his cost was about twice of what it should have been. So it was almost a year later to the exact time of that first meeting in New York, talking about the CDTV. They said, Jeff, got to get the cost down. And I remembered the first meeting, which didn't go so well, and I said, I think I can lay out a board in a couple of weeks. Yes! So I just didn't tell them that they were going to be lucky to be in, pilot production by Christmas. They just didn't want to hear that.
What is pilot production for someone that doesn't know?
It's like the first run off the production line. Okay, you maybe build 100 or 200 units just to kind of debug the whole production process before you significantly turn on the crank. When you're in the consumer electronics business, you basically have to debug the whole process, and then you just step on the gas like you wouldn't believe. And millions of computers fly out the factory, off the factory floor, and that's life in the consumer electronics industry.
So was the CDTV a big hit when it came out, or how'd that go?
It was kind of like the A1000. It had an eclectic group of people that kind of fell in love with it, but because it kind of cost too much, it didn't sell that many. So now we had another person entering the scene at Commodore. His name was Bill Sidneys. Bill was brought in because Mehdi thought that I wasn't the guy for the job. So Bill was the guy behind the IBM PC Junior. You guys remember the IBM PC Junior?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. This is one of the most successful, computers in the history of time. So, of course, Mehdi didn't really understand that the PC Junior was a big... So he hired this guy thinking that he was God's gift to computers. And so anyways, I got put off to the side to say, okay, Jeff, you just do the CDTV stuff and we'll take care of all the rest of the things. And I said, fine, I can make a CDTV product line that would kill every one of the Amigas that I invented. So that was a pretty fun time. We did a tour. One of the things that made the CDTV really, 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 really expensive at the time was a CD-ROM drive. Remember, this is really, really, really new technology at the time. 5-inch round shiny things were, not seen on computers really before. They were the cost of the SCSI-based CD-ROM drive at the time was $400 cost of goods. So I said, I'm never going to be able to meet the price targets so a guy by the name of Hedley Davis, who was one of my engineers, and I did a tour of of all the guys that made CD mechanisms in the Far East. And in fact, I think we even went to Philips in Eindhoven to check them out as well, because Sony and Philips were really the two inventors of the CD-ROM technology. And I found this amazing little mechanism from Sony that was $15. And I said, that's my next generation CD-ROM. They said, no, 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 Jeff. There's no way you can use that for a CD-ROM. I said, watch me. Here's what we're going to do. Da, 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 da. So we basically used an audio CD mechanism, invented an IDE interface, and just lowered the cost, dropped the cost on what it takes to put a CD-ROM on a computer by an amazing amount. To be quite honest, that's exactly what CD-ROMs on a PC are today. So we kind of feel like I taught the whole CD industry how to make cheap CD-ROMs at the time. But fortunately, I got to benefit from that, and we made an incredibly low-cost CD32, which was pretty awesome. And it had an MPEG module for playing movies. It played awesome games, and it was incredibly cheap. So that was a fun time at Commodore as well.
Stand by for 1 minute, Jeff.
Yep.
Where did that come from? One of the doors. Unless something just fell, I don't know. Maybe someone just looked inside.
Andy might be here soon. So do we need to back up, or
What's that?
do we need to back up?
Yeah, we might back up a little bit, and just something actually I forgot to mention. You've been doing fine except for a couple places. When I ask you a question, I need you to rephrase my question in your answer.
Ah.
So if I ask you, was the CDTV
Right.
a success?
I have to.
CDTV was
Yeah. Because you're not going to be on the tape.
Right. So.
Yep.
But yeah, actually, it hasn't been an issue too much. Yeah, you're very articulate, so easy to edit.
Have I done this before? Yeah. Our marketing department at Scala loves me. Pull my string. I'm there.
Cool. Yeah. Are you in some videos on the side or anything?
Sound bites and things like that. I get to talk on industry events and panels and blah blah blah. If you want to be the guru of digital signage, who do you talk to? Talk to Jeff.
Talk to Chuck.
Talk to Chuck.
Talk to Jeff.
Okay, I wish I was as rich as Chuck. I wish I was rich as Steve. Yeah, I was just, somebody kind of burst my bubble. But, I'm having fun. Digital signage is pretty cool.
I think so.
It's
A
like,
friend of mine just got into some kind of business around it. I don't know what he's doing, trying to sell it or.
there's a lot of opportunity here. I mean, you can just, look at the screens in the lobby of the Comcast Center, for crying out loud. So you've got amazing screen technology everywhere you look. So it's really pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think that's Barco down there.
Yeah, it's a Barco. They just do amazing stuff. Oh my God. The trick is feeding the monster.
No kidding. In fact, I think that it actually costs Comcast more for the content that we show on the screens than it does the actual
I
screen.
teach people that all the time. It's like, guys, you might be fixated on the cost of the hardware. That is not the cost that you need to worry about.
Yeah, we got like some agency in New York that.
Oh, yeah.
finds it all.
And how do you keep that fresh and relevant and current and entertaining? And if it's the same old crap over and over again, people get bored at it really easily.
Okay, so I need to talk to you. What was the, what was the market's reaction to the CDTV? How did it go? How did it sell?
The CDTV was kind of like the A1000 when it was first introduced. There was, sort of a loyal cult following there of people that saw the future and said, hey, this is cool technology, and it's a computer that, connects to my TV, and plays all these amazing games. But it needed to take sort of that next step to get into a cost that was, pretty reasonable, affordable. So, in comes Jeff to cost reduce the hell out of that. so that we can make millions of them. In the end, we didn't survive the, Christmas crisis to live to see another day. I was trying desperately to make the CDTV a hit, but unfortunately Commodore, main business suffered in the meantime, and such is life. But it was a great opportunity to, it was one of the first computers that, played MPEG videos. This was, in the early 90s, like 91, 92. So when you think about it, DVDs were much farther off. Digital set-top boxes, they didn't have digital set-top boxes. And in fact, I wasn't too upset when Commodore kind of went blub, because there was this new thing called interactive TV. It was the Al Gore 500 channels of whatever it is that you're going to be watching in the future. So I kind of jumped on that bandwagon and said, okay, I bet we can make an awesome digital set-top box out of this amazing Amiga technology. So having the CD32 and the CDTV background was kind of a parlay into making the set-top box of the future. Mind you, the internet really hadn't happened quite yet. I mean, yes, it was out there and it was doing dial-up modems, but DSL and a browser was still almost unheard of. There was a couple guys at University of Illinois, one of my alma maters, by the way, that kind of came up with the first Mozilla stuff. But this was still relatively new. So as I said, there were two killer apps on the Amiga besides all the games that everybody loved. The Video Toaster and Scala. And I got to know the founder of Scala early on. He was a Norwegian guy who had spent a year being a foreign exchange student in Detroit. His name was John Boehmer. I called him Mr. Sunshine. He was pretty amazing guy. Had a great concept for developing a system to manage content across a network of screens. So when I was still at Commodore and he was at Scala, we kind of got together and said, hey, this whole interactive TV set-top box thing looks like it could really take off here. So we were plotting how we could take the Amiga technology and the Scala technology and put it together to make the next generation set-top box. So we did a little tour of all the big guys in the set-top box business. General Instrument at the time, which later was acquired by Motorola, Scientific Atlanta, which later was acquired by Cisco, and Zenith, which was later acquired by LG. So there weren't many consumer electronics guys left in the set-top box market, so it was pretty easy to make 3 phone calls and set up 3 meetings and go see what you could do. Well, General Instrument had about 60% of the set-top box market back then, so it was pretty clear who you needed to do the deal with. So, believe it or not, we did a deal with General Instrument to be the operating system for their next generation set-top box. They said, hey, the Scala stuff is really great, but those Amiga chips, we got our own chips. So can you take that Amiga, can you take all that cool Amiga stuff and put it on these custom chips that we have? So as Commodore was going blub, I moved over to Scala and hung up my soldering iron and became a software guy, and we figured out how to port our entire playback environment to the next generation of digital set-top box from General Instrument. So that was a fun ride, absolutely a fun ride. The first deployment of that was on a satellite receiver box by a company called PrimeStar. PrimeStar later got acquired by DirecTV. So there's a fellow that worked for PrimeStar out of Bala Cynwyd, PA, Gary Traver, who until recently was working for Comcast out of Colorado. And he was sort of the patron saint of Scala back then, to say, hey, I want to have all this cool Scala technology on these set-top boxes. Unfortunately, PrimeStar was acquired by DirecTV. DirecTV already had their set-top boxes from Thomson. So there was pretty much my hopes and dreams of being in the interactive set-top box business kind of died with that transaction. But, it funded Scala for quite a few years to bring that amazing Amiga technology to the PC. There was a guy by the name of K.Y. Ho out of ATI Technology out of Toronto that had come up with the EGA Wonder Card. This was really the first PC graphics card that could do any kind of games. So, this was the beginning of, Wolfenstein 3D and Quake and Doom and all those, shoot 'em up games from, this was probably middle 90s at this point. And so the PC actually was where the Amiga was from 10 years previous. So it kind of caught up to the first generation Amiga. So
you're saying it took 10 years?
It took 10 years for the PC to catch up to where the Amiga was originally. Now it's great. The PC, it's amazing what you can get for, a $200 or $300 PC these days. Has amazing computer graphics, amazing computing power. And people say, Jeff, what was the key event in the digital signage industry that made that whole industry possible? I said, it's the gaming industry. They said, what? Yeah, if it weren't for people wanting to do home computer games like Quake and Doom and Wolfenstein and all this other kind of stuff, you wouldn't have powerful PC graphics, you wouldn't have powerful low-cost computers, and all the networking that eventually came as well to do, multiplayer gaming over the net. All of that gave me an amazing platform to do digital signage in the future.
So are you saying that video games actually drive innovation in the personal computer market?
Absolutely. The innovation in the personal computer market has always been driven by the computer game market. And if it weren't for computer games, we wouldn't have these. We'd still be doing green screens and Lotus 1, 2, 3.
That's cool. Okay, so all right, can we talk about, when Commodore shut down, did you already have a plan in place? How did you adjust to the Commodore shutting down? It sounds like you had a plan, but please tell me about it.
When Commodore shut down, it was a pretty sad time. We were trying desperately as engineers in the company to try and find somebody that would acquire us, buy us, and things like this. We looked, the CDTV and CD32 technology was cool. The stuff that I was doing on, interactive set-top boxes seemed to be cool. But unfortunately, none of that was to be had. It was the company, intellectual property, was basically sold to a PC company out of Germany called SCOM. They later went out of business because they didn't manage their inventory too well in the PC marketplace, and it basically fizzled on the vine. So, fortunately, I said, there's still life after Commodore. I had a mentor early on in my career from Eastman Kodak who basically said, Jeff, you can't hit a home run every time. Don't sweat it. If 9 out of 10 ideas that you have are a complete failure, it's okay, because guess what? That one that is the home run will make up for all the other 9. So it's a really good lesson to learn for anybody out there that's in, product development and innovation. Don't come with just one idea. Give me 10 ideas, because one of those is bound to be a hit.
Did you have any other stories on mind about Commodore, some of the inner workings that people might find interesting?
Let me think about that for a second. So I think I covered the, why Commodore failed,
Wow.
which was a story that people didn't understand. No problem.
Make sure it's not Andy.
It's probably Andy. I'm in the lobby. Come rescue me.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 1:30.
Oh, 1:30, okay. That's me.
I think that damn ringer was on. Yeah. Yep, he's hit. What? Is this Andy? Hey, it's Zach. How you doing? Good. Hey, are you downstairs?
Okay, got a story queued up.
Beautiful. And whenever you're ready.
All right, so Mehdi Ali brings in Bill Sidneys to head up R&D at Commodore at the time, and he got the job because he said he could cost reduce the Amiga 500 by a large amount. Okay, go ahead, Bill, try and do that. So he went off and made something that was internally called the Amiga 300, which was, of course, supposed to be a cost-reduced Amiga 500. He didn't quite realize he was dealing with the cost reduction expert here, and his Amiga 300 actually ended up costing more money in the end. So we had to rename it the A600 because it cost too much. So don't mess with Jeff cost reduction. Those are like magical things. So there was like monster confusion. So you had this feature reduced, smaller size, slightly smaller size, pretty much did the same as the Amiga 500, except it was not cheaper and it did less. So
is that a typical Commodore move there? Would you
no,
say?
this is an IBM PC Junior kind of move. So, well, guess who you brought in to do your next generation Amiga 500? Guy who brought us the PC Junior. So no surprise there, except for the fact that this caused an amazing amount of confusion in the market. The Germans saw right through this and said, screw that, we're keeping the 500. The Brits said, well, we're solutioning smartly. If the 600 is the new one that we're supposed to be doing, we'll say the 600 is great. So, you had English press out of the UK saying, the 500 is dead, long live the 600. You had the guys in Germany saying, the 600 sucks, long live the 500. So it's like, there was no coordination in this whatsoever. So clearly this was like screwed up. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, I'm gonna rewind here a little bit. Could you talk about the Amiga user community? What were they like?
Let me. Seems like there was one more story.
Okay.
One more story before we get into that.
Sure.
So, needless to say, Bill and Jeff had sort of an adversarial relationship here in development. He put me off into CDTV land and CD32 land and things like that, which is fine. But, occasionally he couldn't really control me too well, apparently. So he'd go, yelling at Mehdi saying, can you do something about Porter? So get summoned to Mehdi's office, as only Mehdi can do. And, he starts yelling and screaming at me. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, and I'm like, okay, what did I do now? So I said, Mehdi, is there anything specific, or am I just a general asshole? Yelling and screaming more. He didn't know. So, okay, I'm a general asshole. Thanks. I'll stop being one.
What was he so angry about?
To this day, I don't actually know what Mehdi was angry about.
I mean, can you give me context in terms of why he might be upset?
Well, part of the problem was, Jeff has this amazing ability to make cool stuff, and I didn't have kind of the PC junior mentality here. So I was off doing, what I thought was best for the company in terms of the product development, the positioning, and, all the stuff that we were doing. And, if it was not what Bill wanted exactly, I said, Bill, that doesn't work for me. We need to go this way. That's what we need to do.
So when Mehdi was getting all upset at you like that, was that in your mind a sign of things to come?
When Mehdi would yell at me, he'd yell at everybody. He'd oftentimes, it was sort of a sport to yell at Jeff. So he'd love to go push my Cuisinart button and just, have other spectators watch what happens when, he pushes my button. I got over it. It's like, okay, great. You're the chief executive. You get to push the button.
Was there ever a kind of a rift between engineering and management at Commodore, would you say?
I wouldn't say that there was really a rift between management and engineering. I mean, there wasn't a lot of overhead in the company. You had the executive office, you had the bean counters, you had salespeople, and you had engineering and manufacturing. So and I've tried to explain this to like Wharton Business School things that were doing, case studies on Commodore at the time, and they didn't really understand. I said, well, think of us as a $1 billion garage shop. You don't have all this infrastructure of a normal company. There is no, big marketing department or big product management department. It's basically engineers building cool stuff that get built in the Far East and get sold in the marketplace. And the engineers that are developing the products better frickin' know what they're doing, or you're going to have a big problem on your hands. Fortunately, we were all designing products that we wanted to have for ourselves. So, it was pretty easy for us to figure out what we wanted to do.
Okay, well, a few minutes ago you said there was a kind of a cult of Amiga that followed you over to Scala. Like, do you feel comfortable speaking about the Amiga user community? Is there a way that they could kind of be generalized?
The Amiga user community was very much a cult following, especially in Europe. I mean, I would say there are all these Amiga hackers, if you will. In fact, probably the early hackers of the day were Amiga freaks. And they would, do all these amazing things with the Amiga for, killer demos and computer games and all this other kind of stuff. And it was really almost a contest to see who would come up with the coolest thing. I remember going to the CeBIT fair, which is in Hanover every March, and just being swarmed by all these, young high school, German freaks that were absolutely into the Amiga, and it was almost like it was the second coming of whatever to, wow, I got to meet Jeff Porter. And all these guys from Commodore that were the guys that built this amazing technology called the Amiga.
So how has that cult affected your life in any way?
Well,
it's Amiga legacy.
The cult is actually, believe it or not, kind of followed me a little bit to Scala. Scala was founded as a software company that basically has a software platform for managing screens on a remote network. So we call it digital signage today. So you may see screens on the gas pumps from Sunoco or Shell, that's Scala. You may see the Lamar billboards on the side of the highway, that's Scala. You may see screens at the Wachovia Center. That's Scala. That's a stadium and arena around the Philadelphia area. Casinos, hotels, just everywhere you look. Lobby of the Comcast Center, humongous screen there from Barco. So you'll see these digital signage uses. So you'll see all these digital signage screens being used everywhere. And there's got to be some software to manage the content of all those screens to make sure it's like razor precision accurate. The message, digital signage is not TV, it's not web, it's not the print, it's this new thing. So you really have to figure out how to feed the monster of content. And so it's really a fun job. It's it's kind of creative, right and left half brain in the same thing. I've got technology and networking and computers, and I've got creative messaging and things like that. And it's the coming together of those two things that really make digital signage fun. And I would say there's quite a lot of people that are Scala users today and Scala resellers and partners that are from the days of the Amiga, and I feel like we have a little bit of a carryover of the cult following from the Amiga into my life today. And it's fun. I've been at Scala for now 17 or 18 years. Yeah, I'm still excited to come to work every day. It's amazing.
Can you think of any anecdotes, any interactions you might have had with the Amiga user community that come to mind?
Okay, well, it's
Think about it.
yeah. We would have all these developer conferences every year, and as a hardware manufacturer, Commodore would need to encourage people to make cool software apps like Scala or the Video Toaster or some killer computer games or something like that. So whenever we had a new computer that we had to introduce, we had to trot that out to all the developers around the world so they would make the next cool thing running on the Amiga. So every year we'd bring all the engineers out and all the software support guys out to explain what's new at Scala and get everybody psyched to do new things for the next Christmas. So it was a fun time. It was kind of people. I was a kid at the time. I was really young, and people were saying, "Well, how is this kid in charge of the entire product development for the Amiga?" And it's like, I don't know. I got lucky, I guess. Part of it's luck, and part of it's being in the right place at the right time. So it was absolutely fun. It was I was a single guy. I was running a $1 billion garage shop from a product development point of view. It was an awesome time. So I was having a ball.
That's great. Are you aware that there are still people using Amigas and there's still a community? What do you think of that?
It's amazing. Every time I turn around, I see folks, especially AV guys. So I go to a conference or maybe I'm speaking on a panel at some event, or I'm talking to the AV guys there. Chances are they've got an Amiga or a Video Toaster or something like that, and they're, oh yeah, that's great. Oh, that was the greatest stuff ever. And so it's like you found your last long best friend, and they're still out there, believe it or not. Now, they're getting older, as I am. But it's great that people fondly remember all the times that we had doing cool stuff on the Amiga early on.
What do you think the reasons are that the Amiga had such staying power that you're still seeing and hearing about it today in some places? What's the reason for that? That it's still
Yeah, I know.
still
I'm gathering my thoughts.
Sure,
Thank you
sure.
very much.
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to phrase
I'm sorry.
get started so
I'm
that.
just getting excited,
Well, you
That's
are.
great stuff.
That is great stuff. Now I've forgotten what I was going to say. So that's okay. It's let's see here. So why is there a cult following with the Amiga still? When we were at Commodore in the mid to late 80s, we were doing stuff that no one else was doing, and it took the PC 10 years to catch up. And that amount of foresight of the future was just, there were a lot of people that were really into that. So even today, you'll find people that fondly remember all the stuff. We were from the future. This was it, and they're loving it. And today they're just, they're doing all the things on a PC or a Mac or something like that they were loving to do on the Amiga. And it just took a little longer for the Mac and the PC to come around, but it's amazing what you can do. In fact, you can get an emulator for the Amiga now, running completely. It's amazing what you can emulate on with the power of the computers today. So you have run the entire Amiga operating system on a PC. Mind you, the Amiga was running on a Motorola 68000 based CPU, and now it's running on an Intel-based CPU, so there's all that emulation involved. So believe it or not, there's quite a following of people that fondly remember all the technology on the Amiga and have brought it forward to today's technology.
How would you compare the world, just the world of personal computers these days as opposed to when you got in the business? What are the most significant differences?
The most significant differences today are really that, people don't so much have computers as a hobby anymore. When I got started, I had a Commodore PET and a VIC-20 and a Commodore 64. I had the whole lineup, right? And this was I was tinkering. It was a hobby for me. I don't know that people really consider a computer a hobby. It's more of an appliance. It's a way to do other stuff. So, it's a way to read email and surf the web and all this other kind of stuff. It's, so I don't think there's as many people thinking about the innovations like that today. Perhaps, people are doing cool things with, mobile phone devices like, iPhones and Android phones and things like that are sort of the innovators of today. But I think the people they're using PCs and Macs these days really don't think about the technology being the innovation or the cool thing. They're trying to do something with it. Well, and to be quite honest, that's the whole reason why you do it, is to do the cool thing. So I'm cool with that.
How has the world of computer design changed since those days as well? How would you compare and contrast it?
Today, to design computers, I mean, it's almost like you have this, automated. Okay, let me back up.
Sure.
Designing computers is completely different today. I mean, the silicon is free. You can put so much technology in a little chip that costs so little these days. It's amazing. You could probably make a single chip Amiga so easily today it would be ridiculous. In fact, a few years ago, there's some guy that made a single chip Commodore 64 and put it in a joystick. It's probably not that far off that somebody puts, Amiga completely in a little mouse and lets you, play your game just in the mouse, with a video connector on it or something like that. So, it's amazing what technology has been able to do. It's Gordon Moore's law. It's amazing how, the amount of things that you can pour into the same amount of silicon technology is just, amazingly powerful today. So really, you're limited more by your imagination than you are by the technology. It's really great.
Actually, yeah, we're trying to get her in the film, by the way. Her name's Jerry Ellsworth, to talk about the joystick.
Okay, great.
Yeah, she's going to be in, I think.
There is an Amiga joystick coming?
No,
the
sorry.
Commodore 64 joystick.
Yeah.
Okay, that would be awesome.
Yeah, we're going to get her in. Okay. Hey, let's just throw this out there. What if the Amiga had, say, become the dominant computing platform for the next couple decades? What do you think might have happened? How would the world be different?
If we didn't screw up the Christmas shipments 2 Christmases in a row, and if Commodore would have managed to parlay that, they could be the dominant multimedia platform today. I'm kind of glad I'm not in the hardware business anymore because it's really pretty cutthroat. The margins that we were making on the Amigas way back when, pretty amazing. Yeah, the hardware business was a good margin. Today, you got 10,000 Chinese guys killing themselves to give you something and making only $10 on it. So it is pretty tough. But, it could have easily been where the PCs and Macs are today in terms of the low-cost technology. I would have loved to seen all that Amiga stuff in all these amazing digital set-top boxes these days. That was clearly one of my dreams from the early 90s. There's all sorts of apps now I can do on my little set-top box. I can do Facebook and Twitter and all this other kind of stuff. So there's a bunch of innovations happening in these interactive set-top boxes. All of that could have been Amiga technology. So I'm kind of over that now, but it's, I'm kind of glad that people are seeing the vision of where we would have gone had we continued successfully. And, I think it's great that we started the industry off, and the people that are doing that innovation today probably got their start on the Amiga.
Okay. We're getting there. How you holding up? You right?
I'm good.
Okay.
Any other sound bites you want to come out of my mouth?
Yeah, I got to actually just thought of a couple things. Who was Bill Hurd?
Bill Hurd was the guy behind the Commodore 128. So when Commodore needed to make the next generation Commodore 64, Bill Hurd was this amazing hardware designer who did some great things. He and Dave Haney and Greg Berlin and some of the other guys at Commodore at the time came up with the C128. Had an 80-column screen instead of a 40-column screen, and did all sorts of stuff. So it was it was great working with these guys. Certainly Dave is probably one of the most prolific bloggers and posters on the Amiga stuff. He was involved in a lot of the technology on the Amiga, as well as myself and Andy Finkel on the software side, and many of the developers. It was a great time.
Oh yeah, who was Andy Finkel?
Andy Finkel led the software team at Commodore, and early on he kind of was one of the first, led the teams going out to California to meet with remember Jay Miner and his team had developed this amazing chipset. The Agnes, Paula, and Denise, these 3 chips that basically were the heart of this next generation game machine that eventually became the Amiga computer. And so, as we were trying to bring the A1000 to market the first time, Andy and a bunch of his guys went out to California to okay, we're going to help bring this operating system to market because we needed to throw a bunch of resources at it to turn that game machine into a real computer. So it was a great time. There were folks out there like R.J. Michael, who was on Bob Paraso on the software side. You had Dave Needle, who was an amazingly crazy hardware engineer out in California. To be quite honest, when I came in to be the hardware guy for the Amiga 500, they kind of thought I was the Antichrist. They were thinking that I was putting the diaper on their baby backwards. And I said, listen, I just want to sell millions of these computers, and here's how we're going to do it. And I know what Commodore can sell, and I know what price point we need to bring this at to make it sell, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make this thing fly. And so they were saying, oh, how can you turn our baby? I need it's got some kind of brick power supply. That's ugly. And I said, it's cheap. I said, the keyboard is, it's not a detachable keyboard, and there's no good place to put your monitor. I said, the whole thing is the keyboard. Just put the whole bloody computer in the keyboard. And it's going to, trust me, it's going to be cheap, and they're going to fly off the shelf. And guess what? It was cheap, and they flew off the shelf.
How about one?
And it's going to, trust me, it's going to be cheap, and they're going to fly off the shelf. And guess what? It was cheap, and they flew off the shelf.
How about one?
There you go.
Now I have a career doing stuff just because I had an Amiga.
There you go. See, you're a testimony to people that had an Amiga early on are doing amazing things with video technology these days.
I was a 12-year-old doing computer graphics in my bedroom.
Exactly.
Do you personally have any regrets, or is there anything you would have done differently in the last days of Commodore? You think that might have made a difference?
If I had to do it all over again, I guess, I was a pretty young kid when I was at Commodore doing all this stuff, and I probably would have tried to appeal to Irving Gould a little bit more. Irving was the chairman of Commodore. He and Jack Tramiel founded the company early on. He was sort of the finance guy behind the money man, and Jack was always the idea man behind the Commodore 64 and things like that. So, you could talk to Irving pretty easily about the computer industry and where it was going, and he could, if he bought into your concept, he could make it happen. So I didn't really push that button probably hard enough as I should, but I'm over it now.
Okay. Any other
Final
stories?
thoughts?
Final thoughts?
Any other cool
Gary's
stories?
final thought.
Scary final thoughts.
We can be done if we want.
Yeah, I think we're done.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. That's right. If you wouldn't mind, Jeff.
Okay.
What were you doing?
So in the early days of Scala, we were doing our our first PC version of Scala after having seen that the Amiga had limited life left in it. And okay, we're doing multimedia on a PC. And it's like the early 90s, and we're doing our first version of Scala on the PC, and we're like working like crazy, bunch of Norwegians, bunch of guys from the Philadelphia area, all getting together. There's quite a few folks, at Scala that were from Commodore. Myself, Darren Greenwald, Peter Cherna, a bunch of people, and meeting up with these Norwegian guys, and we're working like complete crazy people. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. We're all like starving. We got to get something to eat. So the only thing that was open, we went down to a kebab stand in downtown Oslo. It was the only thing open at 2 o'clock in the morning. Some guy is carving some mystery meat off some stick somewhere, and you're putting it in a pita with some, Greek salad kind of thing. And, it tastes pretty good at 2 a.m. when you're starving. So I'm like waiting for my kebab, and some guy comes over to me and says, "You're Jeff Porter, aren't you?" Yeah, so it's crazy. You find these Amiga guys everywhere. And, it's quite a cult following, and it was kind of like crazy that I could be, at 2 o'clock in the morning in downtown Oslo, and somebody says, "You're Jeff Porter, aren't you?" It was so awesome.
That is awesome. That's the kind of stuff I was hoping to get when I started. Beautiful. Okay.
Okay.
Do you